Returning now to one of our top stories, Anthony Albanese's campaign has got off to a shaky start as he struggled to remember key economic figures at his first media conference. Joining me now live is Labor campaign spokesperson Jason Clare. Jason, good morning. How does Labor recover from this?
Well, what you had yesterday was a bit of honesty. We haven't had the leader of this country be honest in a long, long time. Albo made a mistake. We all make mistakes. But what you saw from Albo yesterday was he owned it. He took responsibility for it. That's character. I think most Australians would respect that. Scott Morrison never admits he makes a mistake, never takes responsibility for anything, always says it's not his job. You know, going to Hawaii when Australia was on fire was a mistake. Not ordering enough vaccines when we were in lockdown was a mistake. Yesterday, the Prime Minister was asked a question on morning television about $500,000 of taxpayers' money being paid in compensation to a former Liberal staffer because of actions of his Cabinet Minister, Alan Tudge. And Scott Morrison's answer was, it's not my job to know about this. Whether it's the bushfires, whether it's vaccines or whether it's that, it's always not my responsibility, not my fault, blame somebody else, or say that it's not his job. Now, that's just not right, Danica. What you've seen over the last 24 hours is a comparison in contrast between Anthony Albanese, who will always step up and say, I admit I made a mistake and I'll take responsibility for it, and Scott Morrison, who never takes responsibility for anything and always blames somebody else.
OK, but if he didn't know what the unemployment rate is, how can you say that wages will go up? Because the two are tied.
Well, politics is not a pop quiz. Leadership is not a pop quiz. This is not a game between journalists and politicians here. What leadership is about is identifying what are the problems in our country and coming up with solutions for them. One of them is wages. Wages are going backwards, and they have for the last 9 years under this government. For most of this government, it's been a deliberate policy of this government to keep wages low. It's why you've got almost 1 million Aussies today working 2 jobs and still struggling to pay the bills. At the moment, you've got the cost of almost everything going up and wages going down in real terms. The cost of petrol is about $1,000 more for the average family with the average car this year than it was last year. The cost of childcare is about $800 more this year than it was last year. And the cost of rent, and more than 2 million Australians, Danica, are paying rent. Now, the cost of rent has gone up by, on average, $2,000 this year than last year. They're the real numbers that people around the kitchen table are worried about and they're struggling to pay for at the moment. OK,
but aren't people sitting around the kitchen table also worried about the state of the economy as well? So the comments yesterday, surely they don't wash with the public. Has the damage been done? This was day one of your campaign. Has the damage been done?
Look at the scoreboard. Compare the former Labor government with this government. This government taxes more than the former Labor government. The former Labor government had on average lower unemployment than this government, higher wage growth than this government, and higher economic growth than this government. So if you want to compare the economic records of the two parties, then have a look at the scoreboard. What I think Australians will be looking for here, as they sit around that kitchen table, looking at those bills and thinking how are they going to pay for them, is which party has a long-term plan to help them. Now, in the government, you've got a budget that is all short-term fix, no long-term plan. As soon as the election's over, all that help disappears like that. And Labor, that has a long-term plan here to cut the cost of childcare, cut the cost of electricity, fix aged care, strengthen Medicare, help make it easier for people to buy a home, build more affordable homes, provide free TAFE for people that are struggling to get the skills they need to get a job, as well as set up a National Integrity Commission. And given all that we've seen in the last 3 years when it comes to trust and integrity and the lack of it in this government, that's something I think Australians are screaming out for.
But is Anthony Albanese on tenterhooks now? He can't put a foot wrong for the rest of this election campaign.
I think you're wrong there, Danica. Don't overplay this. I think Australians, in what they saw yesterday, is a leader being honest. Now, compare and contrast that with Scott Morrison, that never takes responsibility for anything, always says it's somebody else's fault, and always says that it's not his job. I think Australians took Scott Morrison on trust 3 years ago. They gave him a shot, but they've been disappointed. Worse than that, I think they're angry. Whether it was with bushfires, vaccines or floods, all they've seen from this Prime Minister is failure, and this is an old government. It's almost a decade old, asking for another decade in power, and they're running out of puff. Worse than that, they're fighting amongst themselves. And if there's one thing that Australians really hate from politicians, is when they're not focused on the Australian people and they're fighting amongst themselves. That's what you see almost every day from this government.
Well, there's no doubt it's going to be a busy few weeks ahead. Jason Clare, we have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.